it's something where everything Steve did was filmed. So while it seems kind of bizarre that his accident was filmed, it really wasn't. Everything he did with wildlife was filmed, and this accident was just...
She watched him walk into a ballroom full of strangers, and she completely fell apart. Not from sadness, not from grief, but because the boy, standing under those lights, had become someone she almost didn't recognize anymore.
One of the greatest gifts in my life is the fact that my entire existence and my childhood growing up with Dad was all captured on camera.
Terri Irwin has faced the hardest moments, losing a husband, raising children alone, carrying a global legacy. But when she saw what Robert had quietly become, something broke wide open inside her. It wasn't the transformation anyone expected. It was the one she'd prayed for. The ballroom moment. So, picture this. It's one of those high-end black-tie galas in Sydney. We're talking expensive suits, clinking champagne glasses, and a room packed with the kind of people who usually don't get starstruck. Terri Irwin is there, doing what she's done for the better part of 20 years, being the Rock. She's the face of the brand, the keeper of the flame, and the person everyone looks to when they want to talk about the good old days of wildlife conservation. She's used to the spotlight, and she's used to being the one everyone leans on. She's the anchor, plain and simple. But then, the double doors at the back of the room swing open, and everything shifts. It wasn't just that Robert Irwin walked into the room, it was how he walked in. If you've followed the Irwins at all, you remember Robert as the little guy in the oversized khakis, the kid with the bowl cut, who was always just a half step behind his dad or his big sister, Bindi. He was the sidekick. He was the mini Steve. But the person who stepped into that ballroom wasn't a sidekick. He was wearing a tailored suit that actually fit. His hair was styled, and he had this wall, this total leading man energy that honestly caught everyone off guard. Terri was standing off to the side, probably expecting a normal night of handshakes and small talk. But when she caught sight of him, it hit her like a freight train. She wasn't looking at the kid anymore. She was looking at a 20-something man who had completely commanded the room without even saying a word. You could see the photographers' heads snap toward him. You could see the socialites stop mid-sentence. It wasn't just because he's famous. It's because he had this presence that felt new. That was the exact second Terri just lost it. And look, she's a tough woman. She's lived through things that would break most people twice over. But seeing Robert like this, so confident, and so much his own person, it just shattered her composure. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She wasn't crying because she missed Steve, though that's always there in the background. She was crying because the transformation was finally complete. Robert broke down in tears too, while speaking about his gratitude for Terri. Terri herself was visibly moved, describing how Robert and Bindi were the reason she could get up every morning after losing Steve. The boy she'd spent nearly 2 decades protecting from the prying eyes of the world and the heavy weight of a dead hero's legacy had finally stepped out of the shadow. He wasn't just surviving, he was absolutely owning the moment. He had taken a tragic blueprint and turned it into something entirely his own. Under those bright lights, Robert Irwin wasn't just the son anymore. He was the man she always hoped he'd become, even if she wasn't quite ready to see it happen so fast. But the resemblance was more than skin deep. The echo of Steve. If you've ever seen a side-by-side photo of Robert Irwin and his father Steve, it's actually kind of jarring. We're not just talking about the blonde hair or the khaki shorts here. It's deeper than that. It's the way they stand, the way they use their hands when they're excited about a lizard, and that specific high-energy squint they both get when the sun hits their eyes. For a long time, the public treated Robert like a living ghost. People wanted him to be the sequel. They wanted the Crocodile Hunter 2.0, and for a kid growing up under a microscope, that is a massive, soul-crushing amount of pressure to carry before you've even hit puberty. But here's the thing. Robert didn't just inherit the looks. He inherited the engines, Chiti. You see it in the way he moves through the bush at Australia Zoo. There's this frantic, beautiful energy that Steve had. This idea that every single second of life is an absolute blast. And Robert has it in spades. But for Terri, seeing that resemblance isn't always easy. Imagine looking at your son every single morning and seeing the face of the man you lost 20 years ago. It's like living with a beautiful, blonde-haired reminder of the greatest tragedy of your life. Every time Robert laughs, it's Steve's laugh. Every time he wrangles an aggressive croc, he uses the exact same footwork his father pioneered back in the 90s. The public loves it, obviously. The internet loses its mind every time Robert recreates one of Steve's iconic photos, like the one of them feeding the same crocodile in the same enclosure, years apart. It's pure legacy bait, and it works every time. But behind the scenes, that echo is a lot more complicated. Robert isn't just a carbon copy. He's a guy who had to learn how to be a man by watching old tapes of a father who wasn't there to teach him how to shave or how to handle a breakup. He had to study the ghost to find himself. Terri has watched this internal battle play out for years. She's seen him struggle with the Mini Steve label, and she's seen him embrace it when it counts. But the transformation she saw in that room was the moment the echo finally started to harmonize with Robert's own voice. He wasn't just Steve's kid anymore. He was a man who looked like Steve, talked a bit like Steve, but had a completely different mission. While Steve was the loud, larger-than-life action hero, Robert is the thoughtful, artistic observer. He's got the same fire, but he's directing it toward a different lens, literally. The physical resemblance is the hook that gets people in the door. But it's the character underneath that's the real story. Robert has managed to take his father's superhero persona and ground it. He's made the Irwin name feel modern, accessible, and dare we say it, cool in a way that resonates with people who weren't even born when the Crocodile Hunter was the biggest thing on cable TV. He isn't running away from the ghost. He's walking right beside it. And that's a level of maturity you just don't see in most 20-year-olds. Then, the silence became deafening. The day the world stopped. Let's go back to the day the good music eventually stopped. We're talking about September 4th, 2006. If you were alive and near a television back then, you remember exactly where you were when the news broke that Steve Irwin was gone. It didn't feel real. It felt like a glitch in the Matrix, because Steve was supposed to be invincible. He was the guy who danced with apex predators for breakfast. But for an 8-year-old Bindi and a 2-year-old Robert, he wasn't a global icon or a TV superhero, he was just Dad. And suddenly, the loudest, brightest light in their universe just flickered out in a freak accident that nobody saw coming. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears. For Terri, the world didn't just stop spinning, it shattered. One minute she's part of the most famous conservation duo on the planet, and the next, she's a widow with 2 toddlers and a massive, hungry zoo to run. The grief was public, it was messy, and it was everywhere. You couldn't walk past a newsstand without seeing Steve's face. Every talk show, every newspaper, every person on the street had an opinion, or a tribute. But behind the closed doors of the family quarters at Australia Zoo, Terri was facing a mountain that looked impossible to climb. She had to mourn the love of her life while simultaneously shielding her kids from the paparazzi who were literally camped outside their gates. Robert was only 2. He has these hazy, fragmented memories of his dad, scents, sounds, the feeling of being lifted up high, but most of what he knows about the man comes from the archives. Think about that for a second. Your father is a world-class legend, but your relationship with him is mostly through a digital screen. While other kids were playing catch with their dads, Robert was watching 4:3 aspect ratio footage of his dad wrestling saltwater crocodiles. He was growing up in a house where the ghost of a giant was in every hallway, every photo frame, and every conversation. The tragic part of the transformation isn't just the loss. It's the vacuum that loss created. Terri had a choice to make in those early years. She could have sold the zoo, taken the kids to a quiet suburb in Oregon, and let the Irwin name fade into a "where are they now" trivia question. Nobody would have blamed her. The weight of carrying that legacy alone was enough to crush anyone. But she didn't. She looked at Robert, who was already starting to crawl toward anything that moved, and she realized the flame couldn't go out. She had to be the mother, the father, the CEO, and the bodyguard all at once. She had to navigate a world where people were waiting for the family to fail, waiting for the Irwin brand to become a circus. Those years were a blur of survival. There were legal battles, financial scares, and the constant, nagging fear that Robert would grow up feeling like he had to be someone he wasn't just to please the fans. Terri spent those years in the trenches, making sure that while the world saw a tragedy, her son saw a future. She was crafting a man out of the wreckage of a hero. The transformation started there, in the quiet, grieving corners of the zoo, long before any lights were ever switched on. She didn't just survive, she became the architect. The architecture of resilience. If you want to understand how a toddler who lost his father in the most public way possible turned into a composed, world-class young man, you have to look at the woman standing in the shadows. Terri Irwin didn't just cope with being a widow, she became a one-woman fortress. Think about the sheer guts it takes to wake up the morning after your husband, the most famous man in Australia, dies, and realize you are now the CEO of a massive wildlife park, the mother of 2 grieving children, and the sole protector of a global brand that everyone wants a piece of. It wasn't just about keeping the crocodiles fed. It was about keeping the soul of her family intact, while the entire planet was watching through a telephoto lens. Terri's quiet war was fought on 2 fronts. On one side, she had the business. Australia Zoo wasn't just a tourist attraction, it was Steve's dream, a sprawling, living, breathing legacy that required millions of dollars to maintain. There were rumors for years that the zoo was on the brink of collapse, that the Irwin magic was gone, and that Terri would eventually pack it in and move back to the States. But she stayed. She dug her heels into the Queensland dirt and refused to let the dream die. She took the meetings, she signed the contracts, and she handled the lawsuits. She became the suit and tie backbone of a khaki empire, all while maintaining that calm, slightly reserved exterior that has become her trademark. She was the architect of a survival plan that shouldn't have worked. But somehow, it did. On the other side of that war was the most important job: raising Robert and Bindi. This is where Terri's real genius as a mother kicked in. Most people in her position would have cashed out and hidden the kids away from the spotlight to give them a normal life. But Terri knew that wasn't an option. Her kids were already famous. Their faces were on lunchboxes and billboards. Instead of hiding them, she shielded them in plain sight. She made sure that every time Robert was in front of a camera, he felt like he was playing, not working. She created a bubble of normalcy within the chaos of a media circus. She was the buffer between her son and the tragic orphan narrative the tabloids were so desperate to write. Behind the scenes, Terri was teaching Robert how to be a man without a father figure in the house. She didn't try to be Steve, but she made sure Steve's values were the wallpaper of their lives. She taught him that kindness was more important than fame, and that the transformation people expected of him, the one where he becomes a reckless daredevil, wasn't the only path. She gave him the space to be quiet, to be nerdy, to be a photographer, and to find his own rhythm. She was the one who dealt with the late-night questions about why Dad wasn't coming home. And she was the one who made sure Robert knew he didn't have to carry the world on his shoulders just because his last name was Irwin. By the time Robert reached his teens, the architecture was complete. Terri had built a foundation so solid that Robert could stand on it without wobbling. She had turned a potential disaster into a dynasty of stability. When you see her looking at him in that room, you aren't just seeing a mom proud of her son's suit. You're seeing a general looking at the battlefield she successfully navigated. She saved the zoo, she saved the legacy, and most importantly, she saved the boy. She didn't just survive the tragedy, she outworked it. He finally found a world where he could see, not just be seen. Finding the lens. The real transformation of Robert Irwin? There's a need to talk about the camera. For years, Robert was the subject. He was the kid in the frame, the one being told where to stand, how to hold the snake, and when to smile for the documentary crew. He was a professional at being seen. But as he hit his teenage years, something shifted. He didn't want to just be the kid in front of the glass anymore. He wanted to be the one behind it. He picked up a digital SLR, and suddenly the world saw a side of Steve Irwin's son that nobody, not even the most cynical tabloid writers, could have predicted. He wasn't just good for a kid, he was actually a world-class wildlife photographer. This wasn't just a hobby to keep him busy between zoo shows. Photography became Robert's private language. Think about the pressure of having a father who was the most high-energy, vocal, and loud personality in television history. How do you find your own voice when the man you're compared to was a human hurricane? You find it in the silence. You find it in the pre-dawn hours, sitting perfectly still in a hide, waiting for a rare bird to land or a predator to strike. While Steve was famous for the action, the wrestling, the shouting, the crikey moments, Robert found his power in the observation. He found a way to honor the animals his father loved, but through a lens of artistic precision rather than raw adrenaline. Terri watched this shift with a mix of relief and fascination. She saw her son trading the performance for the process. When Robert started winning major awards like the Natural History Museum's Wildlife Photographer of the Year, People's Choice Award, it wasn't just a trophy for the shelf. It was a declaration of independence. It was Robert saying to the world, "I have my own eyes. I see things differently." He started traveling the world, from the icy plains of Antarctica to the dense jungles of Africa, documenting the planet in a way that felt sophisticated and modern. He wasn't trying to be a TV character, he was becoming an artist. This transformation through the lens was the first time the public started to see Robert as a distinct individual. He wasn't just the legacy kid anymore. He was the guy who could capture the soul of a dying ecosystem in a single haunting frame. It gave him a sense of agency that he'd never had before. In the photography world, your last name doesn't make the lighting better or the composition sharper. You either have the eye or you don't. Robert proved over and over again that he had it. He was building a bridge between his father's conservation message and a new, visually driven generation that values aesthetics as much as activism. By the time he was 17, Robert wasn't just Steve's son with a camera. He was a legitimate force in the creative world. He had found a way to be part of the Irwin brand without feeling like a carbon copy. He was contributing something new, something quiet, and something deeply personal. Terri saw him sitting at his computer for hours, editing photos with a level of focus that mirrored his father's intensity, just directed at a different screen. He had finally found a world where he could see, not just be seen. And in that quiet observation, he found the man he was supposed to be. The modern transformation was just getting started. The new era of Irwin. If the photography was the quiet foundation of Robert's transformation, what happened next was a full-blown cultural earthquake. We're talking about the moment the little blonde kid from the zoo officially graduated into a global powerhouse. Over the last couple of years, Robert didn't just grow up. He leveled up into a space that very few wildlife warriors ever touch. He became a high-fashion ambassador, a primetime TV host, and honestly, the internet's favorite wholesome crush. This is the era where the Irwin name stopped being a nostalgia act and started being a trendsetter. It wasn't just about animals anymore. It was about a new kind of modern masculinity that people were absolutely starving for. The real turning point was the 2024 to 2025 season. Suddenly, the guy we were used to seeing in dirt-stained khakis was fronting massive campaigns for brands like Bonds and Columbia Sportswear. He wasn't just a spokesperson. He was breaking the internet with photo shoots that had everyone seeing him in a completely different light. People started calling him a thirst trapper with a heart of gold. And while that might make the older generation a bit uncomfortable, it worked. He was reaching a Gen Z audience that might not have watched his father's old shows, but definitely followed his TikTok. He proved that you could be a man's man who wrangles crocodiles and still cares about mental health, fashion, and being genuinely kind. Then came the television takeover, when it was announced that Robert would be co-hosting I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Alongside Julia Morris, a lot of people were skeptical. Could a 20-year-old really carry a primetime slot? The answer was a resounding yes. He was a natural. He had that Steve energy, but with a polished, modern wit that felt fresh. He followed that up by heading to Hollywood for Dancing with the Stars in late 2025. Watching him win that Mirrorball trophy was a massive full-circle moment for the family, especially since Bindi had done the same a decade earlier. By the time the finale aired, Robert wasn't just Australia's son, he was America's new favorite export. Terri was watching all of this from the sidelines, and you have to imagine the whirlwind she was feeling. Her son was suddenly being offered eye-watering paychecks, rumors of $3 million for single hosting gigs, and being courted by major U.S. networks. He was meeting Prince William and getting his own wax figure at Madame Tussauds. He had become a global superstar in his own right, but he was still the same guy who would fly back to Queensland the next day to help birth a baby giraffe at the zoo. This wasn't a celebrity transformation born out of ego. It was a strategic, soulful expansion of the family mission. By early 2026, Robert had navigated the most dangerous habitat of all: fame. He managed to stay scandal-free while becoming more popular than ever. He even debuted a Top Gun-style mustache that became a national talking point, proving that everything he does now has its own gravity. He's no longer the kid clinging to the legacy. He's the one driving it into a new decade. He's shown that the Irwin way doesn't have to stay stuck in 2006. It can evolve, it can be stylish, and it can be bigger than anyone ever dreamed. The transformation was no longer about looking like his father. It was about standing as his father's equal. The private bond behind the scenes was the only thing that stayed the same. The private bond. When the cameras finally stop rolling and the ballroom lights go dark, the Irwin family retreats to a world that most people will never truly see. This is the private sanctuary inside Australia Zoo, a place where the global brand of the Irwins strips away and they just become a mother and her son. For nearly 20 years, it has been Terri and Robert against the world. While the public sees the red carpets and the high-energy TV segments, the real story of Robert's transformation happened in the quiet, mundane moments. Late-night talks over tea in the zoo's kitchen or long drives through the Queensland bush. This is where the emotional heavy lifting was done, away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. Terri has always been Robert's primary sounding board, his manager, and his most trusted confidant. Think about the level of trust required to navigate a childhood where your every move is scrutinized. Robert didn't just grow up. He grew up as a business partner. From the time he was a teenager, Terri included him in the high-level decisions regarding the zoo's future and their global conservation projects. She didn't treat him like a child who needed protecting. She treated him like a successor who needed preparing. This created a bond that is incredibly rare in the celebrity world. It's not just a parent-child dynamic. It's a shared mission. They are the twin pillars holding up a legacy that is much larger than both of them. But it's the emotional side of that bond that really explains why Terri fell apart in that gala. She's the only person on the planet who truly knows what it cost Robert to become that man. She saw the exhaustion behind the smiles when he was flying back and forth between film sets and croc catches. She saw the moments of doubt when he wondered if he'd ever be anything more than Steve's son. Because she was a single mother carrying the same burden, she didn't just sympathize with him, she lived it with him. They've spent 2 decades finishing each other's sentences and navigating the ghost of Steve together. There is a profound, silent understanding between them that doesn't need a script. In private, Robert is known to be the one who looks out for Terri just as much as she looks out for him. As he transitioned into adulthood, the roles began to shift. He became the one offering her a hand on the rugged terrain, the one checking in on her during the anniversaries that still sting, and the one ensuring she felt seen as an individual, not just the widow. He saw her sacrifice her own personal life to ensure his was stable. When he stepped onto that gala floor as a self-assured, powerful man, it was the ultimate thank you to her. It was proof that her 20-year gamble had paid off. She didn't just raise a celebrity. She raised a partner who could finally walk beside her as an equal. This private connection is the secret sauce behind the Irwins' longevity. They aren't a fractured Hollywood family. They are a tight-knit unit that functions on mutual respect and a very specific type of shared grief that has turned into shared strength. They don't just work together, they truly like each other. That's the transformation that actually matters, the one where a traumatized little boy becomes his mother's greatest ally. Returning to the dedication night, the final realization was finally starting to sink in. The full circle. When you look back at that ballroom moment, the tears Terri shed weren't just a reaction to a well-tailored suit or a charismatic entrance. They were the culmination of a 20-year marathon that most people would have quit at mile 5. Standing there, watching Robert navigate a room full of the world's most powerful people with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, Terri finally saw the finish line of her most difficult mission. She hadn't just kept Steve's memory alive, she had successfully shepherded his son through the valley of the shadow of child stardom and out the other side into a healthy, vibrant adulthood. That is the rarest transformation in the celebrity world, the one where the kid actually turns out okay. The weight she had been carrying since 2006. The fear that the world would break Robert, or that he would break under the pressure of being a sequel, finally evaporated in the heat of those gala lights. She realized that by not recognizing the boy in front of her, she was witnessing the greatest victory of her life. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a tribute act. He was a man who had taken the tragedy of his past and used it as fuel to build a future that belonged entirely to him. For a mother who had sacrificed her own identity to protect his, seeing him stand on his own 2 feet was the ultimate permission to finally let go. As the applause swelled in that room, the tragic narrative the tabloids loved to push was officially dead. There was no tragedy here, only a legacy that had evolved into something sophisticated, modern, and profoundly hopeful. Robert Irwin walked into that ballroom as a son, but he stood under those lights as a leader. And for Terri, the tears weren't for what they had lost all those years ago. They were for everything they had managed to save. Tragic, they said? Robert proved everyone wrong. He was transformational. Leave your comments below and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks for supporting us.